This is a response to coquidave. I've been meaning to write it since October when I first saw your video on disability characteristics and political correctness, but other stuff got in the way. I mostly agreed with you on what you were saying, but there were a few things that being disabled from birth and particularly cognitively disabled from birth I think I've noticed but you haven't, although oddly enough it doesn't really change my conclusions I draw from the conclusions you draw. Something to keep in mind here is that I use synthesized speech to communicate. This means that I cannot put inflection into my voice or anything, and at best my body language is very non-standard, including my face. I can do some expressions and stuff if someone is in the room to be reacting to, but it's kind of hard to do them at a camera on command. So I can come off a bit different than I intend to, because short of growing ears and a tail like a cat I can't really throw out all the cues that show people I'm joking or less serious than I sound or something. I am new to this whole thing of writing videos as conversations with other people, so please bear with me a bit here. One of the things you mentioned was that there was an advantage in being disabled from birth in that you're doing all your adjustment as you grow. I'd actually take it further from that. Being disabled from birth there is nothing to adjust to. The whole idea of adjustment seems to mostly come from people who are disabled later on, because you start out one way, and then you get to be another way and you have to adjust. If you start out one way to begin with, you don't really have to adjust to being that way. It's sort of normal for you and you don't even think of it as anything to adjust to until, and I notice this carries over from the idea of adjustment. It's usually other people who get this idea that you must need to adjust to being disabled, so then they start mentioning it and it ends up seeming really weird to you, because it's like, this is the brain I was born with, or the body I was born with, why do I need to adjust to it? You talked about whether people are ostracized or not. I'm curious about something. You talked about disabled people in your high school. How many of those people were cognitively disabled, like how many were autistic or had an intellectual disability or brain damage? Because I spent all of 3 months in a regular high school. They did not quite know what to do with a kid like me, which is to say a kid who did things like run under the desk screaming, or didn't seem to hear what the teacher was saying even though I wasn't deaf, or flopped on the floor and started flicking random objects in front of my eyes really fast, and could make speech sounds with her mouth but it was like I'd be speaking nonsense in 3 different languages. You couldn't get an actual answer to a question out of me because I just repeated things I'd heard people say. And I actually didn't notice as much how people treated me, but I was told later by a guy who'd gone there with me. He told me this about 10 years later. He never saw anyone bullied or ostracized to the extent I was, because it was like even the teachers joined in. The only thing I mostly remember was that kids had these contests, because I often didn't look like I understood what was going on around me, so they would have these contests and bets and stuff over the fact that they could jump up and down on top of me and I would not scream or flinch or try to get away or anything. And school experiences like this, I've heard from mostly other autistic people and other cognitively disabled people in general, more than I've heard them from physically disabled people. Another point about that is, I spent 3 months in high school, and then they tried me in college actually because of some serious miscommunications going on, but after that I spent my entire adolescence in institutions or totally segregated school programs. If you went to a regular school you'd have never actually seen us, so we wouldn't have seemed ostracized, because we wouldn't have been there in the first place. The school I went to took autistic people, it took intellectually disabled people, and it took people in the psychiatric system, so these are all kids you'd have never seen at all unless you saw us being led around outside with our classes in lines. And if you've ever seen sort of those lines of people who are all kind of being led around with a teacher or staff at the front and another one at the back, and all the people in between look really obviously different, I've been in a lot of those lines. But all of that said, I don't think it actually makes a lot of difference to your point. Being ostracized on a regular basis since childhood, and boy have I been ostracized, does not mean that I want to be treated like I'm made of glass and I'll break if you drop me. I mean I've grown up pretty isolated, I've lived through institutions, I've lived through torture, I've even lived through people trying to kill me. It's not like I'm going to suddenly drop dead all of a sudden if someone isn't politically correct around me. I can't really even enjoy hanging out with people if they're going to be walking on eggshells around me. There's some other stuff I want to talk about, but I want to wait until another video I think, so I'll see you later.